Hey, this is James, and in this video, I'm revisiting a former Kipper Grand Tableau. Only, I'm doing it with a twist. So stay tuned. Thanks so much for tuning in and joining me for this viewer-requested video. As I said in the teaser, I'm going to be revisiting a former Kipper Card Grand Tableau, which was also a viewer-requested video. The setup that particular time was a viewer asked me if I would be willing to make a video demonstrating how I work through a Grand Tableau, only instead of using Lenormand, she asked if I would be willing to demonstrate that using Kipper Cards. So she didn't ask me a particular question to go with the request, so I had to pick my own question. So the question I chose at the time was I asked the card to tell me what I needed to know about posting more Kipper-related content to my YouTube channel in the future, because at that point, I believe I had only posted 2 videos that were Kipper-related. So that was the question that I went with. So now let's fast forward 2 years to this point in time. And I have now been approached by another viewer, and so I will give her a shout out. Her name is Rupa. So Rupa, if you're watching this video, this is for you. So Rupa asked me if I would be willing to revisit that particular Grand Tableau, meaning revisit the question, ask the question again 2 years later, and she wanted me to work with a particular deck. The deck that she wants me to work with is her own Kipper deck. So the deck that's going to be assisting me is Rupa Dudley's Kipper Carton. And if you are no stranger to these videos, you will know that I've worked with the deck in my Oracle Outlook video series in the past. So that's the twist. I'm going to be revisiting the same question, which is, what do I need to know about posting more Kipper-related content to my YouTube channel in the future, only I'm doing it 2 years later and with Rupa's deck. So now that I've set things up, let's move to the next segment where I'll be showing you aspects of the deck itself. Before getting into the reading, I just wanted to take a moment to share some aspects of Rupa's deck that I think make it distinct and unique among the Kipper decks that are out in the marketplace. And I also want to share some cards that are going to be playing a role or a part in the Grand Tableau, which I think is significant to talk about from the outset. So in the pile on the far left here, we have the significator cards. And so here we have the main man and the main lady. These are the cards that would represent a male seeker or a female seeker respectively. But what I like about Rupa's set is that she has included an extra set of significators. So we have partner cards, right? So we have the male partner and the female partner. What I like about these cards is that it enables me to do same-sex readings with this deck, right? So I love that. And so now I have 2 choices for the card that's going to represent me. So I could use the traditional main man card in my right hand or the partner card. Now for me, I always tend to like to have the cards represent me or be some kind of reflection of me. And so the fact that the male partner card has glasses on, I will let this card represent me. So this is the card that's going to represent me in the Grand Tableau. And in light of that, because I also read with direction in mind for the significator cards, then I'm going to be using the female partner card in place of the main lady. So these are the cards that are going to be showing up in the Grand Tableau, right? So now the other thing is that there are a number of extra cards in the deck. So if you're no stranger to when I work with this deck in particular, here we have some of the extra cards that I have chosen to use and incorporate into the deck. So we have the Fortune Teller card. This by far is my favorite of the extra cards. So there's Fortune Teller. Here we have Cosmic Connection, Social Media. A card that shows up in a number of readings that I do when I use this deck is the Leisure card, and then Inspiration. So like I said, these are the extra cards that I use But because I'm working with a Grand Tableau, I'm sticking to the 36 cards, so these will not be used for the reading. And since I showed you some of the cards that I use, I'm going to show you the ones that, as of right now, I have not incorporated into the deck when I work with it, but I like having them because they may come into play at some point in my work with the deck in the future. So starting with the top card here, we have Failure. Living Room, so this is an extra card. We had two living room cards, so this is the one I have chosen. The one in the deck that I'm going to be working with is called Parlor, but Living Room and Parlor are the same, it's just a different image. Change, there are two change cards in the deck, so I have picked the alternative one for being in the deck, so I will not be using this one. Same thing for this card. We have two hangout cards, and so this is the extra one. Then some of the other cards, we have Nostalgia, Circus. And what I like about this could actually represent a literal circus, going with the idea that the cards can be somewhat literal, or this could represent some form of entertainment or amusement, right? Then we have Romance, and I like that the fact that it says smell the roses at the top, right? So that's a dual message there. Then we have Playmate, Helpmate, Workmate. Workmate would really be good if you wanted to do a reading about, you know, a colleague or somebody on the job that you work with and there's an issue possibly between you and this person. That would be a great card. And then the last card is Mastermind. So those are the extra cards, and like I said, those are cards that I have not felt inclined to use at this point. So again, we are going to be working with specifically with the partner cards. These are going to be the cards that represent me and a woman significant to the situation, depending on where she falls in the tableau. So now that I've talked about these cards, let's get to the table and lay this tableau out and start taking a look at how it answers the question, what do I need to know, or what can the cards tell me about posting more Kipper related content to my channel in the future. And here we are with the cards laid out in the Grand Tableau. And when I work with Kipper, I personally like to use the 9x4 layout, which is 4 rows of 9 cards, which equals the entire deck. And so now let's remember the question is, what do I need to know, or what can the cards tell me about posting more Kipper related content to my YouTube channel in the future? That was the question that I posed to the cards in the previous Tableau video that I did, and I was being asked to revisit that question. And so the first thing that I usually do in my tableaus is that I look to see where the significator card is. So since this question involves me, I will look for the main male. And so the main male is placed here in the second row. And so for me, I usually look to see what that tells me. So usually the higher up a significator is in the tableau is a good sign for me. In this particular case, it would suggest that I don't have a whole lot weighing down on me in relation to the question, and that the cards that are below me represents what I have overcome in terms of the situation or the question. So again, this is very good placement. And then what I do is after I make note of the initial placement, then I consider the house that the significator is in. In this particular case, the significator main male is in the house of abundance. And so abundance is a card that represents increase, right? For me, it's a card that can represent financial increase. But if we just go with the idea that the question isn't about money per se, then it's usually about lots of something or increase. So this would acknowledge main male in the house of abundance, that I'm in the space of doing more with Kipper. That's keeping in relationship to the question, because now remember, the question was about posting more Kipper related content to the channel, right? And so being in the house of abundance would confirm or validate that in and of itself, right? if I just go with the placement, the cards are saying, yes, you would benefit from posting more Kipper related content to the channel. Now, another thing with the abundance would just be a lot of value, right? So it could suggest that I would benefit or I would get a lot out of the experience in terms of a lot of value, but maybe the people who would be watching the videos would also get a lot of value, right? So, but this is a very good placement, main male in the house of abundance. And then what I would do is I would look at the immediately surrounding cards. And so what I mean by that is I would immediately look at the cross. So I would look at the cards above, below, behind, and before. So keeping with that in mind, above we have the prison card. So prison would be the thoughts, right? Usually the way I read a card above the significator is what's on the person's mind. So here with prison we have limitation, restriction, and confinement. Those are my words for the prison card, right? So it could just be limited thinking or restricted thinking or some sort of confinement in relationship to the question. So now if the question is about posting more content, it could be like up until this point in time, there's been a limitation or restriction on doing that, right? So that's how I would look at prison. Right now, we will revisit that when I move on down the line and look at the cards as a box. But right now, we're just going to do the immediate cross. So that was above. So now below, we have the major card. And so for me, the key word here is discipline, right? So it could be suggesting that there may be an issue for me around discipline regarding posting more Kipper-related content, right? Because if I'm going to commit to that, then there is going to be some need for discipline in the process, right? But so there may be an issue with that. If I immediately mirror the cards, that could be a limitation or restriction on discipline in terms of the commitment to post more content in the future. And then behind we have the fraud card. So my immediate impression of this card is that maybe in the past, because this is behind the main male card, so this is the past, or something that we would consider as a struggle or a challenge, right? Because it's considered inauspicious placement. Usually the fraud card represents something that's being concealed or hidden or something that's bad, wrong, or a mistake. Those are all my words for the fraud card. In this particular case, I immediately thought of the idea of imposter syndrome, right? Going with the word fraud on the card, right? So it could be that up until this point in time, that maybe I thought it would be a mistake or would be bad for me to post content because of the imposter syndrome, which means that the idea would be that maybe I'm in a place where I don't think that I know enough or am skilled enough to be posting Kipper related content. So, but the nice thing about it is seeing it behind me. You know, if I go with the idea this is the past, right? So that could be something that I was considering in the past. And then before is the billionaire card. And so for me, if I go with the idea that this is talking about imposter syndrome, the first thing that I saw with this card is that behind the billionaire in the image, there is a bull. So the first thing that came to me is like that idea about imposter syndrome, that's a bunch of bull. And then I thought that the bull can also represent the stock market because the billionaire card for me can represent money and finance, right? And so this would be a symbol for the stock market. And with that in mind, then I would think about the idea about, investing time and energy in the future, right? So it's an investment of my time and energy. So if I'm going to post more Kipper related content in the future, and this is a good card to have to validate or confirm that, then it would be investing my time, energy, and resources into that endeavor, right? And another thing for me, this is the business card. So this could represent like the more content that I post, Kipper related, could also maybe turn into future business, right? Going with the idea that maybe people might ask if I do private readings or personal readings using the Kipper. right? So that is how I looked at the immediate cross, card above, below, behind, and before. And so now let's move on and take a look at the first three cards. And once I take a look at the placement of the significator card, I like to move on to the first three cards in the tableau. For me, they talk about why the reading's being done, right? So in this particular case, we have setbacks, we have prison, and we have parlor. So setbacks, the first thing that I want to say about this card is it's in the house of the main male. So it's in my house. So for me, setbacks in this particular context could, for me, represent a timeout, a break, or a rest, right? So it would suggest that in relationship to the question that I've given Kipper a timeout, or we've been on some kind of break, or I've given it a rest, right? Which means that I haven't been maybe using the deck up until the point that the question's being asked, right? And if I'm going to post more Kipper related content in the future, then the other aspect of this card for me is about recovering, right? So it's saying too, like, I need to recover from that. I need to kind of get over that. I need to move beyond that if I'm going to make that commitment or engage in that endeavor, right? And then that brings us to prison, right? Again, prison represents limitation and restriction and confinement. So again, needing to get over or recover from the limitation or the restriction, right? Now, if we go back to what I said initially, prison is above main male, right? So if this is my thinking, then this is what I need to heal and recover. I need to heal and recover from thoughts of limitation and restriction, right? And then we move on to parlor. Now, parlor for me is a card that can represent intimacy, it could represent privacy, and it could represent personal space. So if I read the three cards as a line, it would make me think that there was a timeout, there was a break, there was some kind of rest, and during that period, Kipper was being used. It was limited and restricted to my own personal or private use. And so I would need to take that into consideration if I'm going to be sharing more Kipper related content, because these cards are suggesting that at the time or up the situation leading up to the question and up to the tableau being done is that I was using Kipper solely for myself. And so even though I was talking about the first three cards, I want to introduce the card next to parlor because it's the change card, and change is a direction card. First, the meaning of the card is that it represents a change in circumstances, right? And Rupa in her deck has a little visual cue here symbolized by a duck on the card, and the duck is moving from right to left. So the change is taking place moving from this card, profession in this case, to parlor, right? So if we go with the idea here that this is reinforcing this idea about the deck being used for my own personal use, right? Because the change card is pointing to the parlor card. And again, remember, parlor is a card that can represent intimacy. It can also represent privacy. Now, it could also be the change in circumstance is about becoming more intimate with the deck or more intimate with the system. So there's two ways of looking at that, but clearly that this card is signaling some kind of change. And so those are my observations pertaining to the first three or four cards in the tableau. And so now let's move on to my next step in my process, and that is taking a look at the four corners. All right, so the first thing we've done is we've looked at the significator in terms of placement. Then we looked at the first three cards, and so now we're going to take a look at the four corners. Now there are a couple of ways that you could read the corners, so I will share the ways that I do it. Typically, I read the corners in diagonal. In this particular case, we have setbacks in the upper left-hand corner, starting the tableau off, and then that would get paired with great fortune, which is in the bottom right. So that would be one pairing. And then I would look to the upper right. In this case, we have agony. And then pair that with the card in the bottom left. And this is hangout. So that's one way you could do the diagonals, crisscross the corners, or you could read the corners this way. You could start with card 1 and then move to the corner at the opposite end of that row. In this case, agony. So I would look at setbacks and then agony, and then go down from agony to great fortune, and then go from great fortune over to hangout. So I will, for the sake of the video, I will do both. So going with my preferred way of doing it, if we go with the idea of setbacks and great fortune, first thing that I want to say is that while setbacks may be a bit of a challenging card, because it can indicate a healing process or a process of recovery, those kinds of things, great fortune, on the other hand, is the best card in the deck, right? So it is so great that it tends to outshine any negative cards it comes in contact with. So even though we have setbacks here, like I said, great fortune can nullify the more challenging aspects of this card. But here's how I chose to look at those two cards. So again, setbacks would be about a timeout or some kind of break or a rest. But here with great fortune, that would be seen as a blessing, because great fortune is all about blessings. It's all about abundance, good luck, good fortune, great happiness. Those are all words that are associated or assigned to this particular card. So that would give a more positive light to the timeout, the break, or the rest of setbacks, right? And then if we go up to agony, agony is known as grief and adversity. So usually this card can represent a difficulty that needs to be overcome, or something that is very stressful, right? So here, if we go with the idea that the break or the timeout or the rest is a blessing, why is that? It may be because there's a lot of stress, agony, or difficulty around coming to hangout, the idea of going public. For me, hangout is a card that can represent the public, right? And it's very interesting in this particular image. I love the image. Here we have two people playing a game of chess, and they're butting heads, right? Their heads are touching, right? So for me, going with the visual, it could be about, the stress or the difficulty of maybe butting heads with people over the strategy. Chess is a game of strategy, right? It's something very strategic, right? So maybe, the idea, and I kind of mentioned this in the previous Grand Tableau video that I did on this question, about the idea about the court of public opinion, and how interesting is it that the court card is next to this card, right? So here we have, again, this idea about the court of public opinion, people weighing in on the idea of how you go about reading cards, right? And so sometimes that could be very stressful and very difficult, right? So I'm noting that with the hangout card here, right? So that is one way of looking at that. So that the four corners are saying in this particular case that, the timeout or the break up to this point has been a blessing, because I needed to get over the difficulty or the stress involved in going public, right? Going on with the idea that people are going to maybe possibly want to butt heads. So now if we go with the other way of reading the corners, if we go from setbacks to agony, here we have the healing process or the recovery process from stress and adversity, right? And then if we go down to great fortune, then that would be a blessing, right? Or that would be fortuitous. And then that would lead to going public, right? It would say that I would need to get over the stress first before going public, and maybe giving myself some sort of process to do so. So that's how I'm seeing that. It could also be too that I would need to heal and recover from the stress of needing the blessing of other people, right? And so for me, when I looked at it in that regard, that's like a kick in the seat in the pants almost. It's like, ooh, I didn't see that one coming. And so that would bring up my personal story about the need for approval and for people to like me. And so, if I'm going to do that, then I need to be mindful of, if I'm going to post the content, to be aware that not everyone, court of public opinion, or the need to butt heads, is going to like every single Kipper related video that I do. And so I need to get over that, especially if I have the story of, needing to be liked or wanting every video to be liked by everybody who watches it, right? So that would be something I would need to get over or heal and recover from before I do it, right? Kind of thing. So that was profound. And so let's take a moment to look at the houses that each card is in, because that could offer some additional information. So now remember, I talked about setbacks being in the house of the main male, right? So that's just a healing process, recovery process for me personally, or that it's reinforcing this idea that I've been on a break or a timeout, or I've given Kipper and myself some kind of rest period, right? So there's that. Now, if we go over to agony, agony is in the house of change, right? So now remember, if the core meaning of agony is stress and difficulty or adversity, it's stress about changing something, right? Because the house of change would just be change in circumstances, right? So there's stress about a change, or difficulty with change, or having some adversity regarding change, right? If I pair the card in the house, right? And so that could be twofold. That could be me going through the difficulty of change, and then maybe, the content, changing the content up may also be difficult for people on the viewing end, right? If they've become accustomed to me working with a particular system, either Tower or Lenormand, which came before Kipper, then they may have a hard time with the adjustment, right? So that is something else to consider with that, right? And then we have great fortune in the house of great water. So great water is a space that talks about our hopes, our dreams, our wishes, and our goals. So I like having the best card in the deck in this space because it represents good luck with the goal or the wish or the dream, right? Doesn't get any better than that. And then we have hangout in the house of expectations. And so here we have this idea about the public. If this represents the public and going public, then there may be two ways of looking at it. There may be, in the positive sense, there may be some anticipation for that, right? Because that's one of my words for expectations, right? So there may be some anticipation for that. There may be some desire for that, people wanting that, right? That would be in the positives. In the challenging sense, there may be, if we go with the idea this could be talking about visually speaking, about butting heads with other people, it may be based on their expectations of what reading with Kipper is supposed to be like, right? If we go with the idea of court of public opinion and the idea of people wanting to weigh in on how you do it and if you're doing it right or not, then it would be this idea about people's expectations. What are people's expectations around Kipper and how to read Kipper, right? So that is how I would look at the four corners, either reading them diagonally or going around as a square. And so now that we've taken a look at the corners, let's revisit the significator and take a look at the entire box around him. All right, so now we're back and we're going to take a look at the box that the significator is contained within. And so here we have reading the cards in the rows. We have setbacks, prison, and parlor on the top. We have fraud, main male, and billionaire in the middle. And then we have expectations, major, and thoughts at the bottom. And so what I usually do is, because I read with direction in mind, and so the significator is facing to the right, so I would read this column. I usually start off by reading the column and past, present, future. So with that in mind, we have setbacks, fraud, and expectations in the past. So again, setbacks represents a timeout. Fraud would represent things that are bad, wrong, some kind of mistake. And then we have expectations, a card that we haven't talked about yet up to this point. So expectations can talk about a waiting period, anticipation, patience, those kinds of things. A matter of timing. What I love about the image is that she has a clock above her in the visual behind the wall, or attached to the wall, I should say. So that's an idea about, idea of waiting maybe for the right time, right? But the way I would read the past column is that it could be time out, taking a time out, a break, or a rest. However, it might be a mistake, fraud, to wait too long, expectations being about waiting, due to the expectations or the anticipation of others, right? And here, because the woman is looking at the phone, and it makes me think of an old expose song, called I Wish the Phone Would Ring, right? Every time I look at this card, I always hear that song in my head, right? So, she's clearly like waiting to receive something. She's waiting for the phone to ring, right? She's waiting to receive some kind of news or message, right? And so while I might think that it's okay for me to take some time out or take my time, right? Fraud in this particular case could be, I need to heal and recover from the imposter syndrome. Remember, I suggested that before. But the cards are also saying, but don't take too long with that. Don't wait too long, right? You already have people who are anticipating and waiting for that content. In the particular case of the previous video, that was a viewer requested video. So someone asked me to work with the Kipper using a Grand Tableau. In this particular case, it's Rupa herself, right? Rupa asked me to revisit the question and to use her deck for reading on that question, right? And in this particular case, it's like, don't keep Rupa waiting too long to do this video, right? It would be a mistake if you let people wait too long, because then they're going to lose interest, right? They're going to move on to the next thing, right? So I loved seeing that, and that's how I would choose to read this in the past. Now, let's move from the past to the present. In the present, we have the prison, we have main male, and we have the major. So now, I kind of touched on this before when I did the above and below, but let's revisit it again. Prison is about confinement, limitation, and restriction, right? Then there's me. So this could be limitation and restriction imposed on me. It's self-imposed. Remember, this is about my thinking. I'm imposing that on myself, right? So it's about the ways in my head that I am limiting and restricting myself, right? And then we bring major in. Now for me, in this particular case, I don't believe I've touched on this up to this point, but besides about discipline, major can also represent, order and structure, right? He can represent law enforcement. He follows the rules and the regulations, and then he enforces the rules, right? So going with that, I would need to overcome, because the way I read the card is that anything below the significator is what the person needs to kind of overcome, or what they have feelings about, right? So in this particular case, I may need to overcome, maybe the rules, quote unquote, the rules about reading Kipper, right? Or that I need to kind of get over the cartomancy police, those people who, want to weigh in, going back to the court of public opinion, these two cards, right, who want to weigh in on how a person chooses to read a particular system, right, and want to suggest whether the person is actually reading the system, quote unquote, right or not, right? So I refer to that as the cartomancy police, right? I'm a big believer that there's no such thing as, reading it right or wrong. It's a matter of you having your own personal style. If I go with that, then it's about my sense of structure, my sense of order, and my sense of discipline, right? And if I go with that in mind, then I will never need to do this, because here in the court card underneath, we have scales, right? I won't ever need to debate something with another person about how I choose to read, right? It's based on my personal experience with the cards, right? And if it's my experience, no one can tell me that my own personal experience is ever wrong, because it's mine, right? And I would do the same for any other reader, right? But one of the meetings when I was going through this, I looked at this card about, following the rules. And I will say this. Now, also keep in mind that when you're working with the system, yes, it's good to know the foundation. Yes, it's good to know the tradition. But at some point, it's also a matter of the reader finding his or own way through the system, or his or own way style beyond that, right? The tradition helps. The rules, quote unquote, help. But at some point, you're being asked to move beyond that or find your own style. I find it very interesting, and I'm getting a little bit on the soapbox here that I didn't anticipate. But I find it interesting that as card readers, we always encourage people to find their own style and find their own way. And then we want to blast them when they do, because it's not quote unquote right. I don't get that. That's just me personally. I don't get it. Right. But anyway, back to this, getting off my soapbox, then this is just about me overcoming that, right? That self-imposed limitation and restriction because of the quote unquote rules, right? So that is how I would look at the present, right? And that's important if I'm going to post more Kipper related content, right? So now let's move on to the cards that represent the future. Here we have Parlor, Billionaire, and Thoughts. So now the first thing that I want to say is that, remember, we talked about Parlor before. Parlor is about intimacy. So in the future, if I post more Kipper related content to the channel, it would be based on my becoming more intimate with Kipper as a system, right? And very interestingly enough, we have the Parlor card knighting to the major card, right? If we go with the idea that this is about, the discipline and the system of Kipper, right? Then it's about becoming more intimate with that. And then we have Billionaire, and I already talked about Billionaire, talking about the investment of my time and energy. In the future, this would suggest that the investment of my time and energy into this endeavor would pay off. That's how I'm looking at the Billionaire card. And then Thoughts, rounding out the box, is a card that can represent thinking and planning. Right? So when I was looking at this column, it struck me that Billionaire and Thoughts could be about business in the future, and that would be something that I would be thinking about or planning for, right? And that would be as a result of gaining intimacy with the cards, right? Because the Parlor card came first. And so now let's take a look at reading the cards across. So I kind of did that already with 2 of the 3 rows, so I'll just revisit that. Remember, we talked about setbacks, prison, and Parlor. So this is about, the timeout, the break or the rest, the limitation and the restriction, and the intimacy or the privacy. So if I'm going to post more Kipper related content, then it's a matter of getting over that or moving beyond that, right? It's about being willing to share that with the public, right? Kipper not just being a system just for me and me alone, right? And then we talked about this, the fraud, the main male, and the billionaire. It's about, moving beyond the imposter syndrome or believing that it would be a mistake or that I would be doing it wrong, right? And then moving to the investment of my time and energy into that endeavor once I realize that the imposter syndrome thing is a bunch of bull, right? And then now we'll take a look at the bottom row. We have expectations, major, and thoughts. And here we have the expectations to follow the rules in my head or on my mind, right? Which I just kind of talked about in my little rant there before, right? And then again, remember placement. This would be what I would need to overcome because it's the row below me. So again, that would be the expectations to follow the rules in my head or on my mind. And I'm going with the idea that here in the image, the gentleman has a little light bulb going off above his head, right? So that is how I would look at the box. And so now let's move on to the next step in my process where we'll take a look at extending the future line. All right, and so we're back. And so we took a look at the box with the significator in it. And so now let's move on to the next step in my process, which would be extending the future line. And the beautiful thing about this particular layout is that there's lots of cards that are talking about the future. So let's take them one at a time. So again, in the previous segment, we talked about the billionaire card, the card that's in the immediate future because it's closest to the significator. And again, that would be the investment of time and energy. And then we move from that card to the bonus card. And the bonus card is a card that can represent improvement, right? So if I put in the time and invest the energy into this process, I would get something out of it. I would get a bonus or there would be some kind of improvement, right? And then we move into a tricky card here, challenging card here. We have depression. This is known as gloomy or murky thoughts. For me, this card always talks about confusion and uncertainty or some kind of doubt. So it would suggest that while I may be investing the time and energy and making some improvement, there's also going to be some uncertainty and doubt, right? And so sometimes I take a look at this card as representing some kind of mood swings, right? So there may be like, it would be like emotional bouts of uncertainty or doubt, right? And again, that may be based upon, how the content is received, right? So there's that with depression. And then it could suggest like the depression or the uncertainty or the doubt would happen along the way, right? This is a long way. So I'm just going with the pun, like it would be along the way. Sometimes this card can represent a journey. And this would be posting content over time, right? That's how I would look at a long way. And then we move from a long way to letter. Letter is a card that can represent good news. It's usually coined as pleasant letter, right? So it's a card that represents good news when there are positive cards around it. And I would take the idea that long way is a more positive card than depression, right? So it would represent good news, and it's also a communication card. It represents all forms of communication, right? So this could be comments being posted. Those are messages, right? So that's how I look at it. It would make me feel about receiving comments over time, right? If we go with the two cards, right? And then recognition next to letter is a card that can represent achievement, honor, and recognition, right? So this could be, I'm looking at this as letters of achievement or, messages of recognition or messages in which I'm being honored. So that was very positive to see. And then at the end of the line, we have the caretaker card. In traditional Kipper cartomancy, that's known as Good Lady. And so in this particular case, caretaker for me could represent an older woman, a mature woman, and I read with direction in mind. So when a face card or a person card has its back to letter, I usually read that as the message coming from that person, like the person is sending that message. So here we have the idea of an older woman, a mature woman, An experienced woman, I tend to look at good lady as a woman with experience or a woman of authority, and it's because she has a crown above her head. So that would represent she's got, a title or some kind of authority, or that she has achieved some kind of status along with that, right? So it would suggest like over time or along the way, I may receive a particular message from this type of woman. And again, remember the question is about posting more Kipper related content to my YouTube channel. So it would suggest like over time, that particular experience could come into play. And so that is how I would look at the extension of the line. And so now let's move on to the next thing that I would do in this particular tableau, and that is knighting. All right, and now that we have looked at the cards extending the future, we can go back to the main mail and do some knighting. And I love doing knighting with this particular deck because it has a chess motif, and knighting is a process that's based on chess. So the way it goes is we can take the cards by going over 1, down 2, and knight them to the main mail card. So the first card in the process right here is Hangout. And so now remember, Hangout is a card that represents going public. And let's revisit the question. The question is, what do I need to know about posting more Kipper-related content on my channel in the future? And so this card, again, we've talked about it in numerous places already in this video, but this is about going public, right? And then we can go the opposite way. If we go over 1 and down 2, then main mail knights to abundance. And here, abundance represents increase. Now, normally it represents financial increase, but since the question wasn't about money in the literal sense, then we're going to go with the idea about increase, right? And so let's consider the house that this is in. So this is in the house of litigation, which is over here. But litigation in traditional Kipper cartomancy is known as court person or advisor. In this particular case, this would be about making the decision to increase, meaning increase the content, right? If we're talking about posting more content, remember this is about increase, right? So in the house of litigation, this is about making the decision to increase, right? And it could also be suggesting that there's going to be a lot of value, possibly by increasing the content, right? And again, the value to myself, because this knight's to my card, or the value by the people who are watching the content. Another possibility using knighting would be to go over 2, 1, 2, and then down 1. And here we have sad news. So sad news is a challenging card. It usually represents upset or disappointment. Right, so there's a possibility, and I go with that in the future, right? When I knight cards in this side, this would be the past, possibly, and then this would be knighting into the future. Right, so here again we have sad news, a card that represents upset and disappointment. And here it is in the house of major. Now remember, we talked about the major card, which is over here, but it's in the house of major. So now remember, major is about structure, it's about order, it's about discipline and the rules, right? So this could be about facing potential upset and disappointment regarding the rules, quote unquote, about reading with Kipper, right? So that's a possibility. Now, sad news is a cause and effect card. And usually the way I read it is that the card that's behind it represents the cause of the sad news or the disappointment. And then the effect is the card that sad news is facing, which is socialite in this case. So thought is the cause, and this, again, remember, is about thinking and planning. In this particular case, if it leads to upset and disappointment, it could be overthinking and overanalyzing a situation. That's my challenging aspect of this card, right? Overthinking and overanalyzing can lead to upset and disappointment. And what would be the effect? Here we have socialite. In traditional Kipper cartomancy, this is known as young woman or rich girl. if it's not about a person, because in this regard, it could be that the upset or disappointment is going to affect a young woman. I'm more inclined to go with how I would read the card if it's not about a person. And in that particular case, I tend to read socialite as fun and creativity, right? So these three cards are suggesting that overthinking and analyzing is going to be upsetting and disappointing, to either having fun or the creative process, right? So that is how I would look at sad news in relation to thoughts and socialite. Okay, so now let's move on. Let's see what else and I talk about the main male knights to. So another card that it knights to is the change card. And here we have, if we go over 2, 1, 2, and up 1, here we have the change card. Now I talked about the change card when I talked about the first 3 cards. So now remember, change represents a change in circumstances, right? And what I love about this is that it's in the house of hangout, the card that we knighted to initially, right? So this would be a change in circumstances. What kind of change? Going public, right? And so remember, change is a change in circumstances, but it is also a directional cue card. Remember, the duck on the card points to what's being changed or the direction that the change is going into. And remember, here we have parlor, where we talked about earlier, right? So remember, this card can represent becoming more intimate with the deck. Now, if we go with the opposite way, we take a look at profession, which is next to change, right? If the change is going this way, this is what we're putting behind. This is what we're moving away from towards this. Profession, in this case, is a card that can represent a hobby or an interest. So we're moving from the hobby or interest stage more to developing an intimate connection with the system, right? That's the process of change that's taking place. And so those are all the cards that main male knights to. So remember, main male knights to hangout, knights to abundance, knights to sad news, and knights to change. And so there's one more technique that we can do to bring this reading to a close. So the final technique that I'm going to do here is something that I do in my Lenormand Grand Tableaus, and that's a process called counting round. And the way it goes is that we're going to extract 5 cards from the overall Grand Tableau and then read them as a line of 5. So the way it works is that we start with the significator card, or if you wanted to do this with a topic card, you would pick the topic card, but I'm going to go with the main male as a significator. So I'm going to take this card out and I'm going to count 9. So starting with that, this space is 1. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Then expectations becomes the second card. And then we start again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. House becomes the third card. We start again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Mentor becomes the next card. And now we're going to do it again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And success is the last card. So now what I'm going to do is, now that I have the 5 card pull, I'm going to take the remainder of the cards up and we're going to reorient everything so we can take a closer look at the line. And we're back. And so what I've done is I've taken the remaining cards up and I've relayed the cards that I selected in the order that they were extracted from the Grand Tableau. So remember, we have main male, expectations, house, mentor, and success. Right? And the beautiful thing about this is that this is also a line of sight reading because the significator is facing to the right, so all the cards are in his line of sight or in his vision, right? And let's revisit the question, because the line of 5 in the counting round process serves as a final piece of advice, and that's a nice way to bring this reading to a close. So the question was, what do I need to know, or what can the cards tell me about posting more Kipper related content to my YouTube channel in the future? And so we have it set up where we're looking at future related cards, right? So that's beautiful, in line with the question. So now let's start taking a look at the cards one by one. So starting with the first card, main male. So the main male card will always represent a male querent or seeker. So this is me because I am the one asking the question and the reading is about me to some degree. So main male, remember, represents me. Now moving to the next card. In the immediate future, because this is the card that's closest to a main male, is expectations. So remember, expectations is about anticipation. It's about need. It's about desire. It's about being patient and waiting, right? So here we have a dynamic that people are waiting for me. That's one way of looking at the pair. Or that there's going to be some anticipation, that I have something I could look forward to in terms of anticipating something, or if I'm going to choose to post Kipper related content, that I may have my own set of expectations, right? So it can go both ways. Either this could be about other people having the expectation or the anticipation or the desire for me to post more Kipper related content, or that if I do so, I'm going to have some sort of expectations or anticipations about the process, right? And so let's move on from expectations to house. So here we have house in the position representing the heart of the line. I always represent this or see this as the focus or the central issue. So house typically can represent one's home life, one's personal life, and family, right? That doesn't necessarily fit the context. I would go with the other aspects of house for me, and that would be, laying a foundation. And so that would be laying a foundation with Kipper, right? Or that working with Kipper to the point where I feel comfortable enough, because this card for me can represent comfort. So this would be about becoming comfortable, right? So I have the expectation or the need or the desire to become comfortable with Kipper enough to post more content on my channel, right? That would be the way I would be looking at it, right? Another thing that house could represent is the channel itself. If you go with the idea that the image represents the front door to a home, well, the channel itself is my home on YouTube, right? And so people would be coming to my quote-unquote home on YouTube to view the content, right? So here we have the expectation or the anticipation for people to come to the house, which would be come to the channel to look at the material, right? So that is how I would look at the first three cards. And then moving on, we move from house to mentor. And so mentor is a card that in traditional Kipper cartomancy is known as the good lord or the good gentleman. So this could represent a man who would be older than me. So this would be an older man or a male authority figure, like we talked about with caretaker in the previous segments, right? So this would represent an older male or a male authority figure or an experienced male, right? So I'm not so sure. This could represent a man coming to the channel. This could be also to a man who is also one of the people who may be expecting the material or have an anticipation of the material, right, being posted to the channel. That could be a possibility. I'm going to go with maybe the more metaphorical aspect of this card for me, and this could just represent gaining some kind of experience, especially if we're moving down the line towards the future, right? So this could be about posting content, and as I become comfortable with the process, I'm also going to gain experience, right? Another possibility is that I could be seen by potential viewers as a quote-unquote authority on the topic or the subject. I think that's unlikely, but that could also be one of the possibilities being presented in the line. So I'm just going to be sharing that, right? And it could also lead to the fact that maybe there may be people who are going to have the anticipation or the need or the desire for mentoring, right? And that would just be a nice way for me to kind of maybe help them, guide them, assist them in their journey with Kipper itself, right? So that's another possibility as well. And then rounding out the line, we have success. So this card represents a successful outcome. In traditional Kipper cartomancy, it's known as success in love. But when it comes at the end of the line, it usually represents a successful outcome. Very good card to have at the end, right? Now, another possibility here is that if we go with the idea that this can represent an older man, then this card can talk about friendship. So there may be a friendship developed as a result of maybe somebody coming to the channel, an older male. And there is some sort of relationship or friendship that develops. But it would come as a result of the Kipper experience, right? Kipper would be the thing that brings the two of us together, possibly. Right? But if I just read success in and of itself as the outcome, it would be a successful outcome. And so on that note, I will go ahead and bring this video to a close. As I sign off, I'd like to give another shout out to Rupa, who was the inspiration for this video. So Rupa, if you're watching, I hope you found this video helpful and informative. And just as I have that intention for Rupa, I hope that it has been helpful and informative to everyone who has been watching this video. So as I sign off, this is James Himm Mitchell, thanking you for sharing space here with me for this video, and I look forward to sharing the same space with you again in our next video together. So until then, I'm hoping that you have a wonderful day. Take care.